Hey everyone, my name's Trisha, and I am up next. I'm going to share my screen, which made all of you go away. Very good. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Let's see if I can make the chat visible still. Doesn't quite look like it. There we go. Well, I was hoping that this would be pretty interactive, and so I have a short presentation, and I'm hoping that it draws as many questions as Alan's presentation did. It's great to be here. Thank you so much to Hayden and the TransitCon team for allowing me to speak. As I said, my name is Trisha Fridrich. I'm a VP of Business Development and Marketing for All Aboard America Holdings, which is the fourth largest private motor coach company in the US. I love to connect with people on LinkedIn, so I do have my LinkedIn information there. Feel free to message me or Slack through the conference. We work with a number of public transit agencies across the American West, and so I think that what I wanted to share today is sort of how the private motor coach industry can potentially help you. And I know that outsourcing to the private sector sometimes isn't looked at fondly by the public transit agencies, but it can be a solution, both a long-term solution or a short-term solution. You may not have heard of All Aboard America Holdings. We are the fourth largest motor coach company in the US, but we operate under 6 brands. And so we have Luxbus and San Diego in California. Across the Southwest is All Aboard America. In Texas, we have First Class Transportation. Hotard is in Louisiana, and then here in my home city of Denver, we have Ace Express Coaches. And this is really how very similar to how transit agencies operate, regionally or locally, our private motor coach brands are also there. So if you may be more familiar with these brands that you see in your local markets, if you're, in one of the 7 states where we operate. We also, for those of you who are international, specifically in Australia, 6 weeks ago, we entered a binding agreement to be acquired by Kelsian, which is a big player in the transit space in both Australia and the UK. And so we're really excited about having that resource here in the US and looking forward to working with them when the deal closes. The private motor coach industry is much, much smaller than transit. The transit industry is probably an $80 billion industry, and the private motor coach space is 1/6 of that, $15 million a year. But there are 1,800 companies across the US with 30,000 motor coaches, about 50,000 employees. And the place that we operate is famous for charter, right? When you're the last time many of you were probably on a motor coach might have been at a wedding to move between venues. But we take K through 12 students on field trips, pro sports teams, universities, tours of the Grand Canyon. Of course, we're probably best known for that type of work. But during the pandemic, I worked to advocate to Congress for stimulus funding because our industry was absolutely devastated, same as many people on this call, I'm sure, during the pandemic. Because the private motor coach industry, I really think of as the glue that helps support other pieces of industry. When Amtrak needs to repair trains, the private motor coach industry can step in. We also move the military across the US and take a lot of kids to school on school buses. And so we fill all these interesting niches throughout the transportation industry. And part of it is because of our flexibility, because we're both private and because we do a lot of charter work. We can be nimble and sort of bob and weave to fill the gaps, right? When I talk about charter work, those are unique trips each day. So, if we know in advance that a transit agency needs, say, 6 buses for 3 months or 6 months, we can build that into our schedule without having to buy new equipment because things are already dedicated to that. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes in the private motor coach space. And because of that, what you see is a lot of different ways that the private motor coach industry can work with transit agencies, right? We have over 1,000 vehicles in operation every day. Like I said, we're one of the larger companies in this space. And so not only do we have big buses, but we have mini buses as well as Ford Transits, Mercedes Sprinters within our fleet. And it's easy for us to be able to put those into service with transit agencies. Of course, we're also able to maintain and drive your buses, under the proper agreements, of course. But we have multiple vendors that we work with where we, the transit agencies are making the capital investments in the equipment, and then we're actually running and operating it. We also have contracts where we're the single vendor, as well as contracts where there are multiple vendors. And depending on the size of your agency and the amount of vendors that you want to manage, that that choice has different value to everyone. But I challenge you to find a corner of the U.S. where a private motor coach operator doesn't exist, because we are all over in rural and in big cities with lots of needs for transportation. So there's a lot of opportunity here, I think, for public transit agencies to think about the private motor coach industry as an option as you're figuring out how you want to move forward. Now, I'm basing this presentation on the idea that transit agencies across America are constrained by resources, drivers, and fleet. Is there anyone that's listening now that doesn't feel like they're constrained? This is the interactive part of the participation. I'm going to take that as a yes. It feels like drivers seem to be the only constraint. Yes, CDL drivers are difficult to find. It feels like, throughout today and in the news, there's a lot of talk about fare recovery and revenue sources. And so it feels like we're looking for additional resources. And so when we think about how the private motor coach industry can help you, there is obviously the long term, right? We have a number of contracts that last for 5 to 10 years. And when I think about what that does is it allows the transit agencies to really focus on non-operational strategies. How are we getting funding? How do we get more people to ride? Electrification is a big deal right now. But there's also this, how do we think about how service works? My degree is in sociology, although I've been in transportation for more than 20 years. Thinking about how we use transit to service areas that where there's a lower rate of car ownership, or helping people to get to work. I heard this absolutely absurd stat a few months ago that something like 30% of people have anxiety around how they're getting to work each day, and that makes it really hard to keep a job and to support your family if that's a big concern for you. And so I think transit can really fill that gap. And it's part of the reason why I really like this part of our business, is because we're helping to support, equitable access to transportation in our local markets. But these are really hard problems to solve, right? Here in America, how do we get people out of our cars and onto buses or onto trains? How do we drive that forward in a political environment? Stakeholders are taxpayers, and sometimes they're not riding buses. And how do we encourage bonds to pass that allow for funding and subsidies? Or how do we create a model that requires less taxpayer dollars? Those don't have easy answers, and I think each region and each local government has different pieces. But when you think about outsourcing the operations, which, by the way, is still very complicated, especially as Thomas mentioned, the drivers being a constraint. But that's at least a problem that has been solved over the past 10 years. How do we operate buses, and how do we find drivers? And there's, I think sometimes that's an easier problem to solve than some of these other funding and ridership concerns. But the other thing is really on a short-term basis. We spun up service last July for Houston Metro on a very short time period. They were experiencing a driver shortage, and they outsourced to our company, First Class Transportation in Houston, to fill that gap. And that service will last for about a year. And over the past year, Houston Metro has hired a lot more drivers, and they've been able to move forward in a really productive way. And so instead of cutting service, they outsourced that service, and it really filled a gap. The other way is through pilot programs, right? Sometimes it's very difficult to think about making a big capital investment, hiring a team for a program that might only be short term. In a government environment, sometimes that's very difficult to get buy-in and get support. But when you think about what the private sector could do, we can often move a lot more quickly. And so it's easy to sort of test the waters by partnering with the private sector to see if it's a good program. And if it is, make everyone feel a lot more comfortable about making those investments. And so there's lots of ways that the private sector can focus. One of the, we're by nature entrepreneurial and flexible. And so having conversations with your local motor coach operator to say, here's what we think we want to do, how might we be able to work together to do that? And I think when you think about it from an open and transparent partnership perspective, there really are endless opportunities to think about how our industry can help you. There's not one correct way to do it. There really are a lot of different ways to think about it. So I'll give 3 examples. We work with CDOT here in Denver, Colorado on their busting program. And that's a long-term contract, right? It's been in place for almost 10 years. CDOT does own the vehicles. We maintain them, provide drivers and management. And because of this, the CDOT team is very small, right? There's 4 or 5 people within Colorado Department of Transportation who are very active in this program. And they're able to focus on growing it, right? So it's under active expansion. We launched the Pegasus service last May with transits to provide more frequent service, and we run approximately 40 vehicles for them on a 365 days a year, almost 24/7. And we really appreciate the partnership with them. We're all thinking about how we make this service more accessible and raise ridership. And there's a lot of back and forth there to figure out what works best for everyone. We also have been running the New Mexico DOT Park and Ride service out of Santa Fe, and that is another long-term contract. Those are our vehicles, and so we provide the upfront capital for those vehicles, and it's been very consistent. There haven't been a lot of changes to that service over at least the past few years, and it doesn't require a ton of additional capital investments or things like that. So it's day after day, it's mostly the same thing, and they opted to outsource that a number of years ago to us, and we have appreciated their partnership. As I said, Houston Metro is a short-term contract. We are using our ADA vehicles, and so we have 18 vehicles that we're using for a park and ride in Houston, and it was really to address the CDL shortage. As we all know, drivers are difficult to hire and to retain, and they didn't want to cut that service without drivers in place. And so it was a quick mobilization. I think it was less than 6 weeks between the first phone call and when we actually started service. And that's the type of nimbleness that you can expect from the private motor coach industry. And so we work with these 3 partners very differently based on the needs of what they need. And we are both proactive with, supporting them in accomplishing their goals, but also reactive to what the client needs. When they ask for something, we, go back to our drawing board and figure it out and work to help them. And I think part of the reason why over the past, 2 years, the private motor coach industry really has shined as a partner for transit is because people are the key to our success. We look at our drivers and understand what they need. And when we think about our drivers, we're making a commitment to them. We're communicating actively to them. We're being flexible with their needs. We have implemented a number of technology platforms over the last 5 years to help them do their job better. I'm a big fan of the Samsara technology, which provides our drivers a safety score each day. And we found that those investments in safety have really paid off in both retention of our drivers and happiness of them feeling invested in, but also the safety. Safety drives all decisions at All Aboard America Holdings. It's one of our priorities, the same as it is for most of you. But we really think about a driver-centric culture. We've really seen that the market has changed, right? There is a CDL shortage. People are looking for different types of work. They're looking for balance. The next generation of drivers is not showing up to transit agencies or the private motor coach industry in droves. And so how do we attract those types of people? And because of our entrepreneurial culture and because of, we are in the private sector, we're really able to respond to the market quickly to find solutions that work. And so, I'm very happy to share that while we are definitely hiring drivers in all of our locations, we're not scrambling for drivers in all of our locations. And we see that, well-maintained buses, we have an in-house maintenance team that takes care of all of our maintenance, and really empathetic leadership are two of the factors that really set us apart when we think about hiring drivers. So we think that, that ability in a situation, the world is in a state of change right now. And so the private industry is able to react to that change very quickly to help support transit agencies to either fill gaps or continue to provide great service. And this is really the place that I wanted to spend most of the discussion today. There's when I think about a successful transit program, great operations is one key, right? The buses need to be on time. People need to be able to count on transportation to get them where they need to go. And those riders are really what drive the transit program forward. And I think as return to office is evolving and people are figuring out what work looks like in the post-pandemic, those ridership changes are also evolving. And so how do we make sure that their needs are met? And of course, stakeholders, right? Transit programs, very few pay for themselves, if any. And so, taxpayers and the politics and the local market really drives what those three pieces are. And so when I think about, how the private motor coach industry can help support transit, it's really in taking operations off of your plate. Ridership and stakeholders, funding, taxpayers, politics are all very, very complicated. And so if there's one less problem on your plate, it feels like we can focus to find great solutions in the other two key places. Because as we all know, you can't sit down and solve the transit program by sitting behind a laptop or writing out spreadsheets. It really is. It's a people issue, and those problems are complicated to solve. It looks like, so that is most of what I wanted to talk about today. And so I wanted to leave some time for discussion. And it looks like I've got a couple questions here. Jesse says, do you have sustainability goals for your vehicle fleets? We do. We are proudly the only motor coach company in the US that is running a 100% electric motor coach on charter. We have it here in Denver. And so we're very excited to be able to use it here, and people love it. The private sector is not getting all the subsidies that transit and school bus industry are getting for EVs, and they are very expensive. I think we spent over $1 million for ours, but it's really fun to be able to be innovative and be forward thinking in that place, in that space. We do run a number of EVs on transit programs and partners that we have in the Bay Area as well. I'm a frequent coach bus passenger for inner city travel. And one of my main obstacles is lack of bike transport on these buses. So we do have bike racks, and interestingly, the motor coaches which is the bulk of buses that we run, actually have undercarriage storage, right? So that there's the seats are elevated compared to a transit bus, and so there's storage underneath, and so bikes can easily fit there. And there's also often bike storage on the front. And so it's a fairly simple adaptation of the buses to be able to support bikes on motor coaches. Jason says, who makes decisions about route planning and operations? And as a contractor, do you provide feedback to the transit agencies on how they can improve their service? So there, when you work with a contractor, I think there's two ways to approach that. One is that the agency says, these are the routes that we're running, and this is how we're going to do it. And that works, right? There are other agencies who are very interested in the opinion of a contractor, right? We like to work with agencies who are interested in our opinions and who, who we can help move the program forward in thinking about, tying routes together, or hey, if we shift this time, it'll tie to the train station, or if we move this here, there's there's an opportunity for people to be able to connect. And part of that, a lot of that comes because we are often handling inbound customer service requests. And so we see those coming through and can really help to share trends. We're also happy to, continue to run consistent service. And some of that has worked for years. But when you partner with a contractor, there's an entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so when we can be more cost effective with making the riders happy, we get less inbound customer service requests. Or when we can run the service more efficiently and reduce costs, that's a huge benefit. And we often approach our partners in transit with opportunities that say, hey, we see this opportunity, what do you think? And oftentimes there's a number of information that we're not seeing on the other end. And so it helps to be able to bubble up those pieces and be able to have conversations. And I think it really, it depends on the agency, and it depends on what they're looking for from a contractor. Flixbus bought Greyhound this past year. What's my opinion about it? And I think it's a really innovative way to think about how we can help support some of that long haul transit, right? You can take a Greyhound bus from New York to California. And so I like what Flixbus is doing there in terms of making technology more accessible and thinking about how to get more people on buses over a long transportation. There's a number, Julian was just talking about social media, and a pair of, I think, college students took a bus over not a terribly long distance, but it took a lot longer than it should have. And so I'm hoping that they continue to make that service efficient and helpful as we move forward. There's a lot that buses can do in terms of their flexibility. One of my favorite things that I like to think about is that motor coaches and buses don't require any infrastructure, right? Airports need you to build an airport, and light rail needs you to build train tracks and train stations, and buses can pick up anywhere they want. And so it's really easy to be able to make service that's nimble and can change and can be molded as the next few years evolve. And so it's a great way to start programs. It's a great way to figure out if they're working. I would love to see a bus program in place before trains get built, so that we don't spend years and billions of dollars to build stations that may not have the ridership that we expect. Probably a little self-fulfilling though, as you can imagine. Dennis says a big problem nowadays is finding who's actually running intercity service between particular city pairs. I agree. Many do only have Facebook pages rather than web pages. I don't think there's an industry initiative to aggregate that information, but I do know that DePaul University is working on a number of innovative pieces with the intercity bus lines, and so that may be a great place to start. As Amtrak looks to add more long-distance intercity passenger railroads, what role do you see the private-public partnership element working with Amtrak? So we currently work with Amtrak as they're looking to usually maintain their track. And so I would hope that companies like ours in the private motor coach industry would be among the first to have that conversation. To have that conversation with them as they're looking to expand operations. But they do have an aggressive and robust plan for expansion, and I'm excited about that to see how we can work together. It looks like I'm getting a note. It's time to transition. So I really appreciate all of your time here today. I'll share my screen and put my contact information back up. It looks like I'm probably still screen sharing, and so that you can reach out to me. I love to have these conversations, and if there's something that we can do for you from California to the Mississippi, I'm happy to chat or provide you an introduction to a motor coach operator in your area.